Good day, I'm J.R. Knoll. I will be reading from the latest fantasy book I finished called Dragon of the Lake, dedicated to my mother. We begin with chapter 1. It's long been told that dragons will wisp away with human maidens and hold them as part of their hoard, use them as leverage against the human kingdom from which they want gold or favors, or even to keep them in their lairs where the maidens will sing to them. I know of no such dragons in my experience who do this, and yet the stories persist. I don't know if this has ever been seen or experienced by any living humans, but the stories are told, many claiming to be of long ago and involve dragons who were slain by some brave knight or warrior looking to make a name for himself. I find the idea that any human, no matter how mighty or brave, can defeat a dragon of my species in single combat to be ludicrous, but humans will tell their stories. In any event, there is one instance of which I am familiar, one that I know to be true, a story that tells of a dragon who would sweep a human girl away from her people and into a long journey that neither could have foreseen, and two simple lives would be forever changed and by unforeseen circumstances beyond their control. Across the Abtont forest, through the desert, and sweeping across the Terethan mountain range to the sea, autumn would come to announce its inevitable arrival of winter. Winds blew from the north and brought with it a chill in the otherwise hot or warm air. A certain borderland, one made of mountains on the west and the a certain borderland, one made of mountains on the west side of the hardlands, had once been a vast lake and was dotted by islands that had once been mountain peaks. This lake, on the southern tip of the hardlands, was usually a tranquil place and would prove to be disputed territory between the two most powerful dragons. One from the west that was known as Terethgrar the Terrible, and on the east, the one creature in the world he feared, Agarxus the Tyrant, likely the largest and most powerful dragon in the world. This dispute would be settled after a deep crossing into the realm of Agarxus by Terethgrar, who it seemed was pursuing a fleeing dragoness of his. The battle that led to this would push the recognized border 30 leagues to the west, to the very mountains that began the Terethan range. But that is a story for another time. The large island in this lake, one connected to the nearby western shore by boats that ferried goods and people many times a day, and a long rickety bridge of timber and planks, was home to a population of humans and a few gnomes, the latter living inside the caves and tunnels carved into the stone of the island. These humans lived mostly on fish and whatever vegetables and herbs they grew in the gardens, and the occasional crocodile. And these crocodiles were such a part of their daily problem. And these crocodiles were much a part of their daily problems as food they provided, especially the largest of them that were too big to be taken by creatures as frail as humans. This is where our story has its origins, an island settlement of humans and gnomes. Far away from here, far to the northeast and into the tallest peaks of the mountains that run along the spine down the middle of the desert. Let me start over there. Far away from here, far from the northeast and into the tallest peaks of the mountains that ran like a spine down the middle of the desert, a dragon swept against the northern winds, stroking his wings for height, before he would angle down and ride the air currents. His dark blue eyes swept the mountain sides and the ground, black scales reflecting deep red and maroon back as the sun hit them just right. His dorsal scales, running from between his horns all the way to the end of his long tail, were suddenly scarlet, as were the tips of his horns and his long claws. This dragon was not fully an adult, not close to as large as he would grow, and at only 30 seasons old, was very much an adolescent. Still, He was very big for his age, well-muscled, but lean for his kind, for our kind. This was a healthy dragon, a formidable drake, for those his own age, one who had only recently learned to avoid larger dragons. Clutched in his red claws and held close to his chest was a human girl, one who also watched the train below. She wore a long, heavy green cloak that flapped in the passing air. One arm was pinned to her by the dragon's grip, while the other clung to one of his powerful fingers. Her legs were held together tightly by his other hand. Her black hair was long and unruly in the rapidly passing air, and her eyes were squinted against it. Cocooned in the cloak and the dragon's grip, she did not fidget or struggle, but instead seemed to have accepted her fate, that she was a captive in his long talons until he decided otherwise. That, and if she managed to struggle free, the ground was very far below. The dragon's right wing angled upward, and he banked and turned toward what appeared to be the tallest mountain in eyeshot. And he angled himself toward a flat outcropping that was more than large enough to allow a dragon of his 20-pace wingspan to land. Lowering his feet, he swept his wings forward in many air-grabbing strokes, slowing his descent and expertly settling his clawed feet onto the gray stone below him. Once his weight was on his feet and off his wings, he folded his wings tightly to his back and sides and lurched over, gently lowering the maiden he carried to the ground. Laid to her side, she rolled away from the dragon, facing him as her wide eyes were locked on him, and she backed away a step and turned. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing this. Laid to her side, she rolled away from the dragon, facing him as her wide eyes were locked on him, and she backed away a step and turned away from her, and he backed away a step and turned away from her, grasping the cliffside that led to the mountain peak as his flanks heaved for breath. The shoes she wore were not well suited for any time in the wilderness, but she pulled her feet to her, hugging the cloak to her as she sat up and stared at the mighty beast that had taken her into the high mountains. She was a pretty girl for her kind, 17 seasons old, and marrying age, and she reached from within the cloak to comb her hair out of her face, and revealed a lean build that was considered desirable for her kind, a well-muscled and a healthy body that came from a good diet of fish and vegetables and a life of work. Fingernails were short, worn down by her labors, and slowly combed easily through her hair as she stared up at the dragon. Slowly, she leaned forward and stood, her full attention never leaving the dragon before her. As she stood, the cloak blew open to reveal a torn white shirt, one without any sleeves that dropped nearly to her knees, and a leather jerkin dyed green in some effort to make it match her cloak. Her legs were largely bare, her thighs only half concealed by her long shirt. Dark blue eyes studied the dragon for a long moment, and she could not speak. The dragon, still leaning against the cliffside, closed his eyes and drew deeper breaths to catch his wind, and the last few growled out of him as his other hand slid across his belly to grasp his side, that side closest to the cliff on which he leaned. Her voice betrayed lingering youth as she observed, "You don't look so good." Annoyance found his eyes as he opened them and looked down at her from nearly 4 heights, human heights tall. And he growled back in a deep voice that betrayed youth, "I'm fine, just let it go." She raised her brow and folded her arms. He pushed off of the cliff and took 3 long strides to the edge of the outcropping, squinting slightly as he scanned the distant land beyond, a green land past the desert. "You need to eat something," she insisted. "I could eat you," he suggested. I'm serious, she barked. When was the last time you ate? We can go for long periods without food, he informed. You know that. Looking down at her, he observed, you haven't eaten for a while either, and you should eat 2 or 3 times a day. She stared back at him for long seconds, then demanded, what are we doing? He looked east again, scanning the land as he replied, we are surviving. Barely, she snarled back. He growled again. You'll forgive me if I never took instruction on how to care for a human girl. He looked back at her, looking her up and down. We'll need to find you some new clothes. You'll never survive winter in those. I'm sure we'll have to trade money for clothes, she said frankly. And I think you're the one dragon in the world without a horde. He raised a scaly eyebrow, then looked east again. There's a lake in the distance. I'm sure we can find food there. And crocodiles, she added grimly. Like I said, he went on, food. You know I don't like crocodile meat. He nodded. Starving and still a picky eater. She heaved a heavy breath and reached from within the cloak to pull it closer to her. I don't want to argue. He looked back to her and this time raised both of his eyebrows. Looking up at him, she barked, It isn't my fault I'm out here. No, he corrected. It's your fault that you're out here. She looked away again. He turned his attention east. All you had to do was not talk. That's all you had to do. But as always, you just could not help yourself. It wasn't right of them to banish you, she cried. It wasn't right. It was my problem, he snarled. You should have stayed out of it. Her eyes strayed to him again, and she asked, And if they wished to banish me, what would you do? When he did not answer, she prodded, Well, what would the mighty Faragral do? The dragon heaved a hard breath and still did not answer. She finally approached and gently reached up to place a hand on the side of the dragon's leg. His knee was as high as her shoulder. He was a huge, formidable beast with the longest of his sharp teeth as long as her forearm. Still, she had no fear of him and insisted, I'm with you until the end. I've never known a time without you, and I hope I never will. He lowered his eyes. She turned her attention from his face to the wound on his side that was stubbornly slow to heal, and her lips tightened to a thin slit. It wasn't your fault. He heaved another hard breath. Once you heal up, she continued, we'll go back and we aren't going back, he growled. It's over. We'll start over out here somewhere. She nodded. Okay. We start over out here. Looking beyond them, toward the greener and more fertile lands, she insisted, I'll bet all kinds of adventures await us out there. And all kinds of dangers you'll walk right into, he grumbled. Reaching to her, he gently picked her up and held her to him as he had before, opened his wings and leapt from the outcropping. It won't matter, she assured. I'll be right at your side. He just growled in response. You know, she began slowly, there are stories where people ride dragons into great Knoll, he interrupted. But I'm sure we could find someone who could make a saddle that, no. Oh, come on, if I were riding on your back, no. You wouldn't have to carry me all the, no. Within an hour, they landed in a field of beige and light green grass at the edge of a vast lake he had seen. A river that fed into the lake was very wide here and ran slowly at the surface. And the surface of the water was calm and tranquil. Surrounded by hills and trees, it was a beautiful place. And as he set her into the deep grass, she looked around her with wondrous eyes and wore a big smile as she insisted, this has to be the most beautiful place in the world. He just looked down at her, then sat cat-like as he scanned the area around them, alert for any danger that might approach. I'm parched, she informed, as she waded through the grass toward the water. Faragral just watched as she approached the water's edge, wearing no readable expression. As she was nearly there, his brow shot up and he raised his head. Then he sprang up and shouted, Jostly, as he ran toward her with long legs. As he ran toward her with long steps. The girl was just about to crouch down at the water's edge when she heard her name and half turned to see him charging forward, and a splash from the lake alerted her to something deadly and horrible as she stumbled away, screaming as her eyes filled with the vision of white teeth inside the gaping jaws of a huge crocodile. It lunged toward her and she stumbled and fell to her back. Just the crocodile's jaws were as long as she was tall, and it could swallow her with one gulp. But it turned to the right and backed away, its jaws still open as it retreated. Roaring like something from a nightmare, Faragral stomped toward it with his own jaws gaping, scaly lips drawn away from long menacing teeth. The crocodile was huge, but was clearly not up to dealing with a dragon today as it whipped around to splash back into the deep lake. The dragon stood fully, his complete attention locked on the retreating crocodile that nearly matched his own length. Then he grasped his side and turned very annoyed eyes down to the girl.